On the far bank of the Rhine appeared a mighty host, the king with his guests, and they drew nigh to the strand, where damsels led by the bridle stood ready with welcome. When they from Island and Siegfried's men of the Nibelung saw that the ships were come, they hasted to the beach and laid hold, for they spied the king's friends that waited on the other side. It is told of Uta the rich queen that she brought her damsels from the castle to ride with her, so that knights and maidens won knowledge of one another. The Margrave Gary held Kriemhild's bride till they were out from the fortress. Then Siegfried hasted to serve her, for the which he was after requited. Ortwin the Bold went by Dame Uta's side, and paired meetly and in sweet fellowship knights and maidens rode together. Never, in sooth, at such meeting were so many women gathered. The men held tourney in the presence of Kriemhild and the rest, until the ships were landed, and did valiant deeds that had been ill left undone at such a season. Then they lifted rich-attired women from their horses. Ha! What splintering of lances, what din of shields, what noise and clash of wrought bucklers, when the king and his guests were come over to the fair ones that stood by the haven. Gunther with his friends went down from the ships. He led Brunhild by the hand. Garments and precious stones shone bright and sparkled. And Kriemhild went eagerly toward them, and greeted Brunhild and her following. They drew back their headbands with white fingers, and kissed one another through love. Then Kriemhild, the maid, spake courteously. "Thou art right welcome in this land, to me and to my mother, and to our friends." And they curtsied and embraced. Never, I ween, was any greeted fairer than the bride by Uta and her daughter, for they ceased not to kiss her sweet mouth. When Brunhild's women were all gotten to land, the knights led them before the queen, where welcome was not stinted them, and where many a red-mouthed was kissed. The rich king's daughters stood long side by side, and the warriors gazed on them. What these had heard till they saw with their eyes, that none surpassed those two women in beauty, neither was any blemish found in them. They that esteem women for the comeliness of the body and what the eye beholdeth, extolled King Gunther's wife, but the wise that looked deeper said, "Praised shall Kriemhild be before Brunhild." And the bright-attired women drew together where the silken canopies were spread, and the goodly tents in the field before Worms. The king's kinsmen pressed forward to see them. They prayed the two queens to go with their women where the shade was, and the Burgundian knights led them thither. The guests also were now gotten to horse, and there was din of tilting against shields. The dust swirled up from the plain as the land had been on fire, and the valour of many knights was proven, while the maidens beheld their prowess. Siegfried, I ween, rode many a course before the pavilions with his 1,000 Nibelungs. Then came Hagen of Trony at the king's command, and on friendly wise stopped the jousting, lest the dust should irk the fair maidens, and they demurred not, but obeyed gladly. Gernot said, "Let's stand the horses till it groweth cooler, and let us lead the women home, but be ready to ride again when the king giveth the order." So the tourney ended over all the plain, and the knights went to the women under the high pavilions, and passed the time merrily, till it was time to ride home. At the fall of night, when the sun went down, and the air had begun to cool, they tarried not longer, but arose men and women together, and the knights wooed the fair maidens with their eyes. Then, as was the custom of the land, the good squires spurred forward to the castle gate before the proud knights. There the king alighted from his horse, and on knightly wise the heroes lifted down the women. Thereto the noble queens parted. Uta and her daughter went with their attendants into a wide chamber, and a merry din was heard over all. The chairs were set, for the king was ready to go to table with his guests, and beautiful Brunhild stood by him, and wore her crown in Gunther's land. Certes, she was proud enough. Many were the seats, they say, and the tables goodly and broad, and laden with food. Little, I trow, was lacking, and many a noble guest sat there with the king. Gunther's chamberlains carried round water in golden ewers. If any tell you of a prince's table better served, believe it not. Or Gunther took the water, Siegfried, as was meet, minded him of his oath, that he had sworn or ever he saw Brunhild in Island. He said, Forget not the vow thou swearest with thy band, that if Brunhild came into Burgundy, thou wouldst give me thy sister. Where is thine oath now? Mickle toil was mine on the journey. The king answered his guest, Thou hast done well to remind me. I go not back from the oath of my hand. What I can do therein, I will do. They bade Kriemhild to the court before the king. She went up to the hall with her maidens, but Gisela sprang down the stair and cried, Send back the maidens, my sister goeth alone to the king. They brought Kriemhild before Gunther, where he stood amidst of knights from many lands, and they bade her stand in the middle of the hall. Brunhild by this time was come to the table, and knew not of what was toward. Then said Dankrit's son to his kinsmen, Help me now, that my sister take Siegfried to her husband. And they answered with one accord, That may she do with honour. Gunther said, Dear sister, I prithee of thy goodness loose me from mine oath. I promise thee to a knight, and truly thou wilt do my will, if thou take him to husband. The maid answered, Dear brother mine, thou needest not to entreat. Command, and I will obey. Him that thou givest me to husband, I will gladly wed. Siegfried grew red for love and joy, and vowed his service to Kriemhild. And they bade them stand together in a circle, and asked her if she would take the knight. On maidenly wise she was shamefast at the first, yet so great was Siegfried's good fortune and his grace, that she refused not his hand, and the king of the Netherland from his side also plighted his troth to Kriemhild. When their word was given, Siegfried took his queen in his arms straightway, and kissed her before the warriors. The circle brake up when this was ended, and Siegfried took the seat of honour with Kriemhild. The vassals served before them, and his Nibelung knights stood nigh. The king and Brunhild were seated, and Brunhild saw Kriemhild sitting by Siegfried, the which irked her sore. She fell to weeping, and the hot tears ran down her bright cheeks. Whereupon the host said, What aileth thee, sweet lady, that the light of thine eyes is dimmed? Rejoice, shouldst thou rather, for my land, and rich castles and true liegemen are all subject to thee.
I have cause to weep, said the maiden. I grieve from my heart for thy sister, that she sitteth there by thy vassal. I must ever weep to see her so shamed.
But King Gunther answered, I prithee silence. Another time I will tell thee why I gave my sister to Siegfried. May she live happily with the knight. But she said,
I must grieve for her beauty and her birth. If I knew whither, I might flee. I would not suffer thee by me, till thou hast told me how Siegfried hath gotten Kriemhild.
Gunther answered then, Hearken, and I will tell thee, now that he hath lands and castle, even as I, and as a rich king, wherefore I give him my beautiful sister gladly to wife. Yet for all the king could say to her, she was downcast. The knights rose from the table, and the tourney waxed so fierce that the castle rang with the noise. But the king wearied amidst of his guests. He thought, It was softer alone with my wife. And his heart dwelled on the mickle joy her love must bring him. And he looked at her sweetly. Then they stopped the tourney, that the king might retire with his wife. At the foot of the stair that led forth from the hall, Kriemhild and Brunhild came face to face. They were not foes yet. Their attendants followed them, and longer they tarried not. The chamberlains brought candles, and the knights of the two kings parted in two companies, and many followed Siegfried. Then came the heroes where they were to lie, and each thought to win his wife's favour, whereat their hearts melted. With Siegfried all went well. He caressed the maiden lovingly, and she was as his life. He had not given her alone for 1,000 other women. Of them I will tell no further. Hear now how it fared with Gunther. Better had been his case with any but Brunhild. The folk had departed, dames and knights, the door was made fast. He thought to win her love, but it was long yet or she became his wife. He lay down in a white garment and thought, now I have my heart's desire. The king's hand hid the light. He went to Brunhild and embraced her with his arm. He was greatly glad. He would have caressed her sweetly if she had let him. But she was so wroth that he was dismayed. He thought to find joy, but found deep hate. She said, noble knight, let me alone, for it shall not be as thou desirest. Mark well that I will have naught to do with thee till that thou hast answered me concerning Kriemhild. Then Gunther began to be angry with her, and he fought with her, and tore her raiment, and the royal maiden seized a girdle, a strong embroidered silk cord that she wore round her waist, and did hurt enow to the knight. She bound his hands and his feet, and carried him to a nail, and hung him on the wall. She forbade him to touch her, because he disturbed her sleep. He almost perished from her strength. Then he that should have been master began to pray. Now loose my bands, most noble queen. I promise never to touch thee, or even to come nigh thee. She asked not how he fared while she lay soft. There must he hang the long night through till the day, when the bright morning shone through the window. If he had ever had strength, he had little in his body now. Tell me, Sir Gunther, said the beautiful maiden, doth it not irk thee that thy chamberlains find thee bound by the hand of a woman? The noble knight answered, it were the worse for thee. Also little were my honour therein. Of thy charity allow me to lie down, seeing thou hatest my love. I will not so much as touch thy garment with my hand. Then she loosed his bands and let him go, and he laid him down but so far from her that he ruffled not her beautiful gown, even that she had gladly forgone. Thereupon their attendants came and brought them new apparel, as much as they could wear, that had been made ready against the wedding morn. But amidst of them that rejoiced, the king was heavy of his cheer beneath his crown that day. According to the good custom of the land, Gunther and Brunhild tarried not longer, but went to the minster to hear mass. Thither also went Siegfried, and there was great press of people. Crowns and robes were ready for them there, and after they had taken their vows they stood up, all four, proudly beneath their crowns. Youths to the number of 600 or more were dubbed knights, I say sooth, in honour of the king, and great joy was in Burgundy, and much splintering of lances by sworded knights. The beautiful maidens sat at the windows, and underneath them was the flashing of many shields. But the king stood apart from his men, and went about sadly. He and Siegfried were unlike of their moods. The hero guessed what ailed him, and went to him and asked him, Tell me how it hath fared with thee. Then said the host to his guest, Shame and hurt have I suffered from my wife in my house. When I would have caressed her, she bound me tight, and took me to a nail, and hung me up on the wall. There I dangled in fear the night through till the day, or she loosed me. How soft she lay there! I tell thee this in secret. And stark Siegfried said, I grieve for thee. I will tell thee a remedy, if thou keep it from her. I will so contrive it that this night she will defy thee no longer. The word was welcome to Gunther after his pain. Now see my hands, how they are swollen. She overmastered me as I had been a child, that the blood spurted all over me from my nails. I thought not to come off with my life. Said Siegfried, It will yet be well. Unequal was our fortune last night. Thy sister Kriemhild is dearer to me than mine own body. This day must Brunhild be thy wife. I will come to-night to thy room secretly in my town kappa, that none may guess the trick. Send the chamberlains to their beds. I will put out the lights in the hands of the pages, and by this sign thou shalt know that I am nigh. I will win thy wife for thee, or perish. If only thou winnest her not for thyself. She is my dear wife, otherwise I rejoice. Do to her what thou wilt, if thou tookest her life. I would bear it. She is a terrible woman. I vow to thee on my honour that I will have naught to do with her. Thy dear sister is more to me than any I have ever seen. And Gunther believed Siegfried's word. Meanwhile the guests rode at the tourney with fortune good and bad, but when it was time for the women to go to the hall, they stopped the tilting and the din, and the chamberlains bade the folk void the way. And now the courtyard was empty of horses and men. A bishop led each queen before the kings to table, and many proud knights followed them to their seats. The king sat beside his wife in good hope, for he minded Siegfried's promise. The one day seemed to him as 30, for he thought only on Brunhild. Scarce could he wait till they rose from the table. Fair Kriemhild and also Brunhild were led to their chambers. Ha! What bold knights went before the queens! Joyful and without hate, Siegfried the knight sat sweetly beside his beautiful wife. With her white hand she caressed his, till she knew not how he vanished before her eyes. When she played with him and saw him no longer, she said to her maidens, I marvel much where the king has gone. Who took his hand out of mine? And so the matter dropped. He had gone where he found the chamberlains with the lights, which he began to put out. By this sign Gunther perceived that it was Siegfried. He knew well what he wanted, and he sent away the women and maidens. When that was done, the king himself locked the door and shot 2 strong bolts before it. He hid the light quickly behind the bed curtain, and the struggle that had to come began between stark Siegfried and the beautiful maiden. King Gunther was both glad and sorry. Siegfried lay down by the queen, but she said, Stop, Gunther, lest thou suffer as afore. Thou mayest again receive a hurt at my hand. Siegfried concealed his voice and spake not. Gunther heard well all that passed, albeit he saw nothing. There was little ease for the twain. Siegfried feigned that he was Gunther, and put his arm round the valiant maiden. She threw him onto a bench that his head rang loud against a footstool. The bold man sprang up undaunted, but evil befell him. Such defence from a woman I ween the world will never see more, because he would not let her be. Brunhild rose up. It is unseemly of thee, said the brave maiden. Thou wilt tear my beautiful gown. Thou art churlish, and must suffer for it. Thou shalt see. She caught the good knight in her arms, and would have bound him as she had done to the king, that she might have peace. Grimly she avenged her torn raiment. What availed him then, his strength and his prowess? She proved to him the mastery of her body, and carried him by force, since there was no other way, and squeezed him hard against a press that stood by the bed. Alack, thought the knight, if I lose my life by the hand of a woman, all wives evermore will make light of their husbands that without this would not dare. The king heard it well. He feared for the man. Then Siegfried was ashamed and waxed furious. He grappled fiercely with her, and in terror of his life strove to overcome Brunhild. When she seized him down, he got up again in spite of her, by dint of his anger and his mickle strength. He came in great scathe. In the chamber there was smiting with many blows. King Gunther likewise stood in peril. He danced to and fro quickly before them. So mightily they strove, it was a wonder they came off with their lives. The trouble of the king was twofold, yet most he feared Siegfried's death. for she had almost killed the knight. Had he dared, he had gone to his help. The strife endured long atwixt them. Then Siegfried got hold of Brunhild, albeit she fought valiantly. Her defence was grown weak. It seemed long to the king that stood there till Siegfried had won. She squeezed his hands till by her strength the blood spurted out from his nails. Then he brake the strong will that she had shown at the first. The king heard it all, but he spake no word. Siegfried pressed her down till she cried aloud, for his might hurt her greatly. She clutched at her side, where she found her girdle, and sought to tie his hands, but he gripped her till the joints of her body cracked. So the strife was ended. She said, "Noble king, let me live. I will make good to thee what I have done, and strive no more. Truly, I have found thee to be my master." Siegfried rose up then and left her as though he would throw off his clothes. He drew from her hand a gold ring, without that she was ware of it. He took her girdle also, a gold silken band. I know not if he did it from pride. He gave them to his wife, and suffered for it after. The king and the fair maiden were left together, and for that she was grown weak. She hid her anger, for it availed her nothing. So they abode there till the bright day. Meanwhile Siegfried went back to his sweet love, that received him kindly. He turned the questions aside that she asked him, and hid from her for long what he had brought with him, till at the last, when they were gotten home to the Netherland, he gave her the jewel, the which brought him and many knights to their graves. Much merrier was Gunther of his cheer the next morning than afore. Throughout his lands many a noble knight rejoiced, and the guests that he had bidden to the hightide were well feasted and served. The hightide lasted 14 days, during the which time the din of the sports and the pastimes they practised ceased not. Mickle was the cost to the king. The king's kinsmen gave in his honour to the stranger knights, as their lord willed it, apparel and ruddy gold and horses, and thereto silver enow. And they that received the gifts took their leave well content. Also Siegfried of the Netherland and his 1,000 knights gave all that they had brought with them, goodly horses with saddles, certes, they lived right royally. Nevertheless, or they had made an end of giving, they deemed it long, for they were weary for their home. Never were guests better entreated. So ended the hightide, and the warriors went their ways.